online information session. Today we're talking about our transition to 100% electronic plan review for in-house review projects starting on January of 2024. And the planning department will also be speaking about their new review and approval process. We have some slides, and to kick us off today, we have Neville Pereira, our Deputy Director for Permit Services. And then later on, we'll hear from Liz Waddy from the Planning Department, and then we'll do a Q&A session so you can ask questions and share some feedback. And with that, I'll turn it over to Neville, and we'll get some slides going.
Great. Thank you, Patrick, and welcome everybody. Thank you for being here. As Patrick said, this is actually our second webinar on this topic. And if you were at that other webinar, welcome back. I hope that you have some questions for us, and then if you don't, we'll get you asking questions if you need to. All right, so if we can just head into the first slide, Patrick. So as you heard, if you've been in our lobby, if you've been in our public advisory forum, we've been talking about it for about 75 days or so. This transition that we're doing January 1st to 100% EPR, electronic plan review, for all in-house projects. And therefore, starting that day, we will no longer be accepting paper plans for in-house plan review. Next slide. This transition builds on something that we've been doing for about a year now, probably a little over the year, for requesting EPR projects for those projects that request a priority processing using our Administrative Bulletin 04. So if you were coming in as a priority housing project, an accessory dwelling unit, or any other priority, we requested that you come in using electronic plan review, because our existing paper process is just a sequential process and really bogs you down in the processing. Mac users who are also who've been submitting using EPR in the past and have complained about the lack of access to Bluebeam Session, this will apply to you. Just submit your projects using a PDF of your plans and your documentation, your permit application as well. We'll use our existing Bluebeam review software to review that, and then generate a PDF letter of comments back to you. So you don't have to participate. In fact, very soon here, we'll be talking about the next version of electronic plan review, how we'll move away from having this kind of the studios, which you know as Bluebeam Studio Session, where we invite the applicant into the review session. We'll be doing away with that fairly soon as well. Applicants who come into the center to submit in person after January 1st will also be directed to submit online. So if you're walking with paper, there's going to be a myriad of options for you to convert that paper into a PDF submittal for us. Next slide. The reason why we're doing this is primarily to save time and resources. You no longer need to apply in person. You can do all your plan submittal process from the comfort of your own office or home. It will also save the applicant project sponsor the $4 per page fee at the permit issuance end of things, where we require $4 per page to archive that set of paper plans, to get it scanned and archived thereafter. I'll be talking a little bit about the completeness check, which is now going to be part of our process. Liz is going to be maybe talking about that from the planning perspective as well. But we at DBI, many of you know that we've implemented a pre-plan check process whereby we, upon submittal, we'll review these sets of plans for completeness and quality, make sure we have as full a set of documents as possible to allow us, the city, to give you a full plan review the first time, a thorough plan review, and therefore less back and forth. We found in the past that submittals were coming in generally incomplete. when we started the program, about a third of our projects were rejected because they were incomplete in some way. That's gotten a lot better with time. We're closer to 15 or 10%, now. And then just faster review, right? Electronic plan review allows the plans to be disseminated to all departments at the same time, so that we can all review it concurrently at best, or at least have access to all the plans at the same time. Next slide. So part of this process will be to submit an electronic permit application using a new online portal. And if you go onto our DBI website today, and very soon, it'll step you through the process of submitting your application. If you're familiar with our website at all, we have an existing step-by-step process, but it also encompasses the paper process. So we'll be taking that off of our website for in-house review. And then at around the third step of this process, Patrick, you could advance the slide. At around the third step, applicants will be able to click on a link on this form and then upload their applications. Whereas our process before allowed you to transmit your plans to us via email, that had certain limitations for security and also size of plans. The new process will be beginning to end and allow you up to 100 megabytes in file size for a single file. Next. So our communications team, as well as various other departments in the city, have been hard at work to get a list of submission guidelines prepared for the public to tell you, our customer, what's required to have a complete submittal. So this will be on the DBI website, and there'll be links to that same website throughout the city, which will just tell you what comprises a full set. So hopefully you can get a full submittal the first time. Next slide. There'll also be a page explaining what it takes to conduct an electronic plan review. And like I said earlier on, we're in the process of changing this just to be able to accommodate all of our customers, right? We've heard from you through various surveys that if you're an Apple Macintosh shop, you can't participate in the Bluebeam session. Some people say, well, it's unfair that you asked me to purchase the Bluebeam software. Well, you don't need to anymore. You just submit us a plan set in PDF form. We'll review that internally using Bluebeam, just so we can share comments and use all the tools. Bluebeam is the best of breed software out there for plan markup, and then we'll just convert that into a plan check document. We'll also share back the plan markups with you so that you can have access to those as well. The next slide, please. And then lastly, there'll be a page for EPR resources. As you know, there's a email address that's set aside for questions. If you have questions about EPR, that's out there as well. And we'll be probably changing the staffing of that email address if you have questions. Next slide. So this electronic submittal process is using a new tool, a series of web forms, which will allow you to not only fill out the basic contact information, upload your plans, and as soon as that application is submitted online or accepted online, you'll get a confirmation email, as you would for shopping online for something. You get an immediate confirmation email saying that we've received your submission. What happens next slide, is that we then go to work reviewing the application in-house and basically doing this completeness check. What's a term that you'll start to hear more often. This completeness check is something that DBI has been doing for over a year or so, about a year and a half. And it really looks at the documents, make sure that everything's appropriate for that submittal. DBI will be just one of 6 other agencies, right? All agencies will be reviewing your plan set for completeness and appropriateness for their department. So you can imagine PUC looking at this, public health's going to look at it and say, either I'm not applicable, we as a department don't need to see that, or yes, we are part of the review, and this part of your documentation is missing. Those comments will be compiled and sent to you at some point if they're missing documentation. You'll also receive a confirmation email prior to this once you have your application number. Again, your application number is generated right up front, but there still may be immediate comments about your completeness of plans that will prevent your application from moving forward until you give us a full set of plans. Next slide. So like this, so I just talked about this. After staff reviews your application submittal, you receive a letter either indicating that it's a complete submittal, it's deemed complete, and that you're in line for a complete review, or you get a letter back saying that these sets of documents or these other things are missing from your application, and we will not initiate the full plan reviews process until your application is deemed fully complete. Next slide. So as I said earlier on, we will continue to use our Bluebeam review software internally and gradually phase out applicants from being part of the review session. Why is that? In surveying our customers and looking at the best use of this software, we've determined that the applicant some of the time gets confused by these comments being generated inside Bluebeam, and where they answer the comments directly into Bluebeam and continuously upload revisions. We're finding internally our city departments are getting out of sync with each other. If you can imagine, say 5 agencies reviewing a set of plans, you may have DPW on revision 5, whereas the building department is looking at revision 2, and maybe the health department is looking at revision 3. So we want to control that for our sake and also for your sake, to be able to, and also for legislative reasons, because starting January 1st, also there's going to be new legislation that's effective for certain types of applications that sets a time clock for our review. Essentially, housing projects. What's a housing project? A housing project is any construction project, any building permit that creates 1 unit or more, 1 or more dwelling units. That's a housing project. So any housing project that's 25 units or less, we're allowed 30 working days, which is about 6 weeks, to get comments out, first review out to you. Anything that's 26 units or more, we have 12 weeks, 60 working days to get that back out to you. And then there's certain other projects. You can imagine a tall building, for example. We may ask for an exemption on that just because of the complexity of the review. So that time clock starts at the point of application intake, essentially when you pay the fees for your plan has been deemed complete. We'll take in your fees. That's when your clock starts ticking. Clock stops ticking once we return comments to you, and we'll return the comments to you as quickly as they're generated within that timeline. And then, as you can imagine, when that project comes back in, we will start another time clock for the same time that the legislation allows. So that's one of the reasons why we're going to have this. You will not be able to resubmit an application package for revision until you have received and you've incorporated all of your comments into that plan set. Some people may say, well, hey, that's not fair. I want to move as quickly as possible, but you got to see this from both sides. It will help you, the designer, and our customer become more coordinated with your plan set. It'll also help us, the city, the various departments, act on that quicker for you as a consolidated review body. Next slide, please. Okay, going back to the Mac users as well, submit your plans as PDFs. You'll get a PDF marked up back. Your plan set will be marked up, and you'll have that to review, as well as you get a plan check letter in a PDF as well. And nobody is required to get a subscription of Bluebeam anymore. The implementation of Bluebeam and Bluebeam Studio session works in some environments. It didn't work as well here at the city. Some people may think or may have thought that they're very used to that way of conducting business with the city. This is generally better for all, to have us internally use a markup software and have you externally use the basic tools for looking at electronic documents. So a PDF viewer, most of the Office suites will allow you to do that, as well as Adobe and so on and so forth. Next slide. Okay, if you do come to the department into the permit center with paper, you'll be asked to convert that into an electronic form. So please be advised, come prepared to save yourself time converting that. We do have the print center available on the second floor that's able to convert paper, scan those documents into PDF. If you're coming in with a very large set, I would say anything that's over maybe 15 pages, please do yourself a favor and get that converted beforehand, just because our permit center may not be able to convert that over for you immediately. Obviously, it's best to send over directly using our online portal from your office or wherever you want to. Next slide. So those people who between now and the end of the year, you've only got a week and a half or so left, you'll be encouraged to submit in electronically as best as possible to facilitate that review process, right? If you still want to walk in with paper, go ahead and do that. Just know that it will be a slower process for you. Those people that submitted projects today in paper will remain in paper if they choose. We, as you can imagine, we have several racks and rooms full of paper here that we will actively, over the course of the next few months, be calling you, the customer, to have those projects converted over to electronic form. You would have to scan them at your own cost, and then submit back to us the electronic set. How does that benefit you and us? Firstly, it allows us to go through our inventory of projects back here to make sure that the project is still live and is not expired, right? If it is expired, we'll be contacting you nonetheless, just to make sure that you recognize that we still have your paperwork and be able to turn that back to you. If you have something that's about to expire, and you may want to place that on hold for a little bit longer, we'll give you the option again to scan it into electronic form, or keep it in paper if you'd like. Next slide. Obviously, it makes sense for you, if you're at the end of the process, maybe to keep it in paper and just get those last reviews, and then get the project issued in paper. But again, you'll be in total control. You'll be asked for your preference. I would encourage you, if you're early in the process or even have the project on hold, to convert it to electronic form. It's just as your project picks up again, it will just go through the process a lot quicker than paper would. Next slide. So over-the-counter projects will still be submitted in paper for now. We do have plans to convert that process in due time. Nothing to worry about, for probably at least a year or so. So those will still be in paper. And then I know that a lot of our frequent customers have the practice of coming in here and getting a very quick approval on one or more departments on paper sets using the OTC process, and then they'll walk back to the CPB counter and convert that from a Form 8 to a Form 3. And then at that point, we'll be asking you to convert it from paper to electronic. Now, the planning department and I have talked about this. We recognize that this is a practice that's out there, and we want to make sure that we work with you, our customers, to make sure that you're not spending unnecessary money on paper and then having to convert it, and then you're not delaying our staff by originally asking for a Form 8 and then converting to a Form 3. So planning, and you're about to hear from planning on a potential fix for that. And we'll be working with you again to make sure that you get the quickest possible approval for those OTC, those quick OTC approvals, and then take it in for the rest of the review. And then lastly, OTC projects that have maybe one or two departments, you may choose to remain in paper for OTC approvals. Next slide. We will have the online email address, dbiepr@sf.gov for questions. And then there'll also be somebody at the Permit Center help desk to talk about this process, and to make sure that whatever questions you have will be answered appropriately. There has been some talk about, well, there's going to be a rush for everyone trying to get their paper projects approved over the counter. Please recognize there's no reason for any panic right now. Our process is still our process, and there's nothing that's going to exclude you from continuing that. So if you still have paper, you initiated your application prior to January, please feel free to continue that way. But just know any new projects going forward for in-house review, be prepared to convert that. Next slide. Okay. That's it for me. I think, are we going to take questions now? We'll go directly to planning.
Now we're going to go directly to planning.
Okay.
I'm going to turn it over to Liz Waddy with the planning department, and then we'll turn to questions as soon as Liz's presentation is over. So Liz, go ahead and let me know when you're ready, and I'll bring up your presentation.
Go ahead. Thanks. Go ahead and bring up the presentation. Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Waddy, Director of Current Planning with the Planning Department. And I'm here to share our piece of what I call sort of the AB 1114 implementation puzzle. And I just want to sort of start the, if we can put that in, there we go, slideshow would be great. And I wanted to take sort of a 10,000-foot step back a little bit to before I dive into some of the changes that we're going to be making as part of the permitting process to explain the rationale why. As many of you know, AB 1114 was adopted into law this year, as Neville sort of kicked things off with. And we really wanted to make sure that the spirit of that law that was approved at the state was maintained. I'm sure as everyone on this call knows who's listening in, the San Francisco process is unique as compared to many other jurisdictions in the state, particularly as it relates to sort of the planning process. And so we were really trying to figure out how we could adapt our planning processes to really meet the intent of this state law that's intended to apply more broadly. So the intent, again, at 10,000 feet of AB 1114 was to really do, I would say, three, primary things. It was focusing on post-entitlement permitting, to make sure that post-entitlement permits were, for housing projects, I should say, preface all of this, were not appealable, and that post-entitlement permits really had predictable timeframes. Obviously, there's a lot of nuance to these laws, but I'd say that that's really some of the big takeaway, is that once you've gone through a process to entitle, quote unquote, a project, usually going through the planning process, figuring out the nuts and bolts of getting through the life safety process and building a process should be ministerial, with no appeals, and predictable. And so with that being sort of our gold star that we're working towards, the challenge that we sort of were presented with were the subset of projects where They are principally permitted, and the entitling happened on a site permit or on a building permit. So these are most often known as, projects that need neighborhood notification, known as Section 311. We'll go ahead and go to the next slide. So in thinking about how do we ensure that, again, that spirit of making sure people have these smooth, predictable, appeal-free permitting processes, how do we ensure that when the entitling is happening in that same permit? Sort of conflating the issue of, is it post-entitlement if it's entitling, right? So that was sort of the predicament that we were faced with. It's very clear when a project goes to the planning commission that there's a distinction between that action and when one files a building permit. But it's this subset where they're smushed together, where we were really kind of grappling with how are we going to deal with this. So in response to that, what we really did was decided we are going to effectively extract ourselves out of the site permit process. We are going to handle our review independently. Once our review is done, issue a planning approval letter for the project saying the project's been approved. You've gone through whatever requirements you're required to do in the planning process. And that is then your golden ticket to go to the building department and submit that, upload that into the portal that Neville just described, and proceed on with your construction permitting process. And so, what I wanted to highlight on this slide was what that end result is going to be is basically that in the simplest of terms, there's two paths for planning department approvals. There's over the counter, no change. So we're not going to talk about that anymore once we leave this slide. And then there is anything that's not over the counter. And as you all know, that can vary dramatically. That can vary from things that are principally permitted, but just need a Section 311 neighborhood notification, which used to happen on a site permit or building permit. That can include ministerial housing projects, which are really growing dramatically come 2024 in terms of the number of projects that will be eligible for ministerial housing projects, meaning they're not subject to any notification, any public hearings, any discretionary action. So that bucket is filling up quite a bit, and we need to figure out how we are going to deal with those projects. Also, side note, the state had informed us for that subset of projects, we really could not mandate that people filed building permits before they got their approval for planning. So we were already kind of being forced down this path of figuring out a way of how do we approve things that don't need hearings without requiring a building permit. And so hence landing on this new planning department approval letter. We also, though, because again, we really want this to be easy, consistent, and a predictable process and not create too many, different paths for people to go down. We also said, we're going to use this same system if you need a public hearing. So if you need a planning commission hearing, which as again, many of you who are following along know, there's just legislation approved finally this week by the Board of Supervisors that significantly reduce the number of public hearings that will be required for housing projects moving forward. But let's say you do still need a conditional use, for example, at the Planning Commission. Status quo, the normal process that you'd normally go through, and we will basically just issue when we, wrap up all the closeout of our normal conditional use process, we'll basically issue you a cover letter that will be this planning department approval letter. So every time you leave the planning department with an approval, there'll be a consistent cover letter effectively. The cover letter might be a one-pager, it might be long with a bunch of findings in it, but you'll know that it always will look the same. And part of our goal with that is so that when you go to the building department staff are going to get very accustomed to knowing what they're looking for. Like, what is the thing we're looking for that will say, planning department's cleared this project, you're allowed to proceed with your construction permitting. We didn't want the building department to have to, know what a variance approval letter looks like versus a planning commission conditional use versus, a ministerial housing project. We wanted sort of like the templates to all look the same. So we're creating this planning department approval letter that is really consistent. The other thing that I think is important to note, although this whole process, the impetus is AB 1114, which is for housing production. Again, big focus on good government is not having too many different paths of how you process work. We hear over and over again, it gets very confusing when there are all of these different, variables and processes. And so we said, this seems like a simple enough system. We're also going to have this apply to non-housing projects. So let's say you're coming in and, I don't know, you're applying for a change of use for some land use that's commercial related, for example, or you need a conditional use for a formula retail project, something of that nature. You'll still follow the exact same process where you're basically applying for a planning department approval letter, and we'll figure out, does that need a hearing? Does that need notice? Is that just allowed as of right? We'll issue this letter. Let's go to next slide. So to reiterate, sort of process, like what is this? What is the mechanism for filing? How is your experience going to either be the same or change from sort of the way it is now to the way it will be come January 1? The way it is now, there's pretty much two different approaches. You either have a hearing. For projects that have a hearing at the Planning Commission, usually start by filing an email to our clerical staff at the Planning Department or through our Excella Citizen Access portal. You upload all of your documents, which usually include a PRJ, which is our project application, and then what other documents you need for that project specifically, you know, plans, if it needs a conditional use application, if it needs a variance application, pre-application materials with neighbors, SB 330 application, right? You all know we have a ton of different forms that one might have to apply depending on the specifics of the project. So that's option one, you need a hearing. Option two used to be, I'm just doing a vertical addition on a single family home or adding a second unit into an existing single family home and doing an expansion. Totally code compliant, but we need to go through neighborhood notice. Let's hope our neighbors don't file a discretionary review that takes us to a hearing. So in that scenario, the way it is today, you'd go to the building department and you'd kick things off at DBI. You would have to produce plans that meet their minimum plan submittal guidelines. They would do that pre-plan check that Neville mentioned. You would, you know, start to pay your fees at DBI. And as soon as they sort of accept it, they always just kick it over to planning. We're the first routing station. And at planning, we go through our normal thing. We also then take it to our clerical staff again, right? You'll start seeing there were some of these redundancies. Our clerical staff do a 30-day completeness check. And we rolled out in July 1 a new protocol that I'm very proud that we've actually really met this, where we're doing 30-day completeness checks that our clerical staff are doing. And once you pass a completeness, our planners are doing 30-day reviews. So there's no more of this, you're waiting in a queue for 4 months to get a planner assigned. You're getting a planner assigned right away. They're issuing a letter of full planning code analysis, design review analysis, preservation analysis, environmental review analysis within that 30 days. All of that is the way it is today. And then when we're done with doing our neighborhood notice, whatever we need to do on the building permit scenario, the output is we sign off on a building permit and we send it back to DBI. Right, so that's sort of the way it is now. Moving forward, the primary difference in this is just the intake and the output. The middle stuff all stays the same. So the beginning part, you no longer need to go to DBI. You no longer need your plans to go through DBI's pre-plan check at that moment in time. You just email it to the planning department like you would if you were going to a hearing or through our Excella Citizen Access. You then kick off all of the middle stuff that I just talked about, the 30-day completeness check, the plan check letter, you deal with all of your stuff that you normally would with planning. When we're ready to approve your project, again, regardless of the mechanism for it, instead of us signing off on the building permit, we issue you this letter. And then with this letter, you can choose to either immediately turn around that next day and go onto the online portal and submit for your construction drawings and move forward with the timelines outlined in AB 1114 that Neville talked about earlier. Or you can take a beat. You can, you know, take a year, you can go get financing. Now you have a milestone that's a clear, tangible approval from the city to build a project. That, you know, is what we've heard from a lot of folks is a really important milestone, particularly in this era of very tight financing. And so that's a nice sort of clean cut. So you can take up to the 3 years that we will include in our conditions of approval to go file your building permit. Whenever you are ready, though, it's as simple as you just upload that planning approval letter and then you proceed on with the construction permitting process. So we'll move on to the next slide here. But really, this is more of a intake and an output sort of change more than it is any substantive experience that you'll have with the planning department. So just a couple details that I think are important to relay. This will also, I think, one of the unintended benefits of this process is that we do sometimes have projects where on the commercial side of things, where let's say somebody's just getting an approval for extended hours of operation for a business, or somebody is going from a retail store to a formula retail store, and they're not doing any construction. They just are sort of name change only, right? There are a few of these discrete, or they're adding a liquor license to a restaurant, right? You're going from a cafe, adding a liquor license. The planning department cares about that. It's a change in our planning code, change of use. The building department could care less that you're adding a liquor license to your restaurant. In the past, the only mechanism we had to memorialize that change was a building permit. So we would make people file a building permit to do that. And a lot of our business owners were so confused because they're like, but I'm not building anything. Why do I need to go through the building department? It's not a change of occupancy. Like, why are we doing this? So I think it'll really save a lot of pain for a lot of our small business owners. Another important note, and these are kind of in a little bit of random order here, but this planning approval is not individually appealable. It's not adding any new process or risk in that sense. We're really kind of treating it the same way that with a building permit, we used to be a row, a line item in the review process. We've just extracted that out, but it's playing that same, it's a piece of a puzzle. It's not its own thing that has its own appeal. It doesn't have its own independent intake fee. So this isn't going to cost people anymore. We're going to get our cost recovery when you do file that building permit. So those building permit fees for planning will stay the same, but we're going to do candidly some work up front without getting compensated for it. The sort of fourth bullet on here, I think something that'll be actually really helpful that we've never had in the past is for projects that really had this only a building permit. There was no easy way for us to either apply conditions of approval when there were conditions of approval, or clearly articulate how long this approval is good for. And so now we'll be able to be issuing conditions of approval in this letter easily. So I think it'll just bring some transparency and clarity to the conversation. And then, as I said before, like this is your golden ticket to go file a construction permit. Next slide. I wanted to touch on, because I think this is important, there will be a little bit of a transition moment when we, as with any new process, so when the new year hits, we're going to be in a moment where there are a lot of projects out there that have maybe gone through a planning commission approval at the planning commission, but they haven't yet filed their building permit. So from our perspective, they're entitled projects, but they haven't yet engaged in the building permit process. For those projects, because again, we really want these things to be consistent, we want DBI to have sort of the same letterhead, right, that I was talking about before, so that they know that this project is approved. We're going to ask you to quickly pop over to our planning information counter, where we'll issue at the counter that cover letter. So we're really trying to make sure that we get the benefits of giving, DBI's clerical staff and intake staff that predictability of knowing, are we a thumbs up or a thumbs down of this project being entitled, without adding any kind of net new burden to you all. So we've decided that can all happen at our public counter. So just wanted to share with you sort of that's our solution for dealing with that universe. Next slide. And as I mentioned before, the intake's super simple. As Neville talked a lot about the efforts that the city's focusing on going fully digital, we're doing the same. So we want all of these applications for planning letters. You can do it from the comfort of your own home, just either via email or through our Excella Citizen Access portal. And next slide. So this is where I'll wrap. I think what's most important is to highlight sort of, I see it as like 5 key takeaways here. First up, we always require that you file a PRJ, a project application, no matter what right now, and that's staying the same. That PRJ will just now be filed via email directly to us, rather than having to do it through the filing of a building permit. 2, the middle process, kind of the engagement with the planning department, will be the same. Your experience will be the same. The timelines will be the same. The costs will be the same. There's no change to that. So you should all be very comfortable as soon as you hit submit that you're going to have the same process. Third takeaway, it's just the change to the approval deliverable that we give. We're no longer going to sign off in PTS in that little middle row. Instead, we're going to issue you a letter that you can take away. And again, you're no longer midstream. You actually have a concrete approval, which again, full circle on financing, I think is a really important tool. Fourth takeaway, you'll then file your building permit when you're ready to do so. I think likely this will really reduce the need for people to file site permits. And instead enable people to kind of get their ducks in a row, get their construction documents ready to go and file whole, construction permits with all of the deferred submittals that DBI is allowing, so that, obviously if you do need to parse things in little bits, there's still opportunities to do that. But I do think this will likely drive down the need for a site permit, which was originally back in the day created as a way to basically get through the planning process without having to prepare those technical drawings. And then lastly, 5, once you do file a building permit, the planning department, our only role once you file a building permit is we are part of that concurrent spot check. So we are going to be part of that, and literally our planner's job will be in those same, 30-day reviews or 60-day reviews for housing projects to say, here are the set of plans that were approved as part of that planning approval letter. Is the project the same? Has the project changed? Do you comply with the conditions of approval? There will be no second jeopardy. There'll be no asking for tweaks or we've changed our approach to how we do design review. There'll be none of that. It's purely almost more of that ministerial style spot check of, is it in conformity with the thing that was approved? So those are sort of the 5 primary takeaways. And with that, I will end my section and just wanted to let you know I'm also have on the line here Kate Connor, who is our housing expert extraordinaire. So if folks have any nitty-gritty questions about either AB 1114 or any of our other housing programs or processes, she and her team have really helped to develop the details of this proposal and get it launched. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and Patrick, before we open it up for the public, I just wanted to underscore a couple of things with Liz. So when somebody's coming for that OTC planning approval, you can do it right there over the counter. What are the customers coming to your planner with? Is it a PDF on a thumb drive or something that you can then also take in with your approval letter, so that they can then take that thumb drive over to CPB, again, to make sure that the applicant doesn't have to go through a rigmarole of coming in with paper and then scanning that?
So I think for today, all that we were talking about in terms of PIC was that our PIC process is staying the same. Like, we are not proposing any changes to what can be approved over the counter right now. The role that our PIC is playing that is a little, I wouldn't say different, but we're going to leverage the use of our PIC for projects that had approvals from the Planning Commission in the past, whether this year, last year, or the year prior, who are ready to come file that digital building permit. They can come to the planning counter and we will email them a PDF of that planning approval letter so that they have the right materials to go do a digital project. So we don't like to get in the habit of using thumb drives. I think our IT staff are probably freaking out behind the scenes saying no thumb drives being put on government computers. But we now have the technology where we can generate, again, it's a quick 1-page cover letter for that scenario of projects that have previous Planning Commission approvals. It's literally going to be a 1-pager where we copy and paste the project description and we say, it was approved via Planning Commission motion number X, Y, and Z from this date. Save PDF. What's your email, customer? We'll send it to you right now. And then they'll be able to have that go home and finish doing their upload, or hop onto the Wi-Fi at the permit center and they'll have it in their inbox if they want to finish doing the submittal at the permit center.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll stop there. I'll leave the rest for the public here.
Terrific. Thanks a lot, Neville, and thank you, Liz. That was a great presentation. Just to let everybody know, we do have Neville is available for questions along with Liz and Kate Connor from the Planning Department. We have Michael Christensen from the Permit Center and Javier Rivera from DPW. If you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make, please just raise your hand and Kelly will call on you. Then you unmute your line and ask your question. Kelly, do we have anybody on the line?
Not yet. For those of you who have questions, please raise your hand. There should be a button in the bottom of your screen with the hand icon. And I'll go down the list and call out the names one by one. Okay, we've got a couple of hands. I'll start with David Sternberg. David, I just sent you a request to unmute.
Nice to see you all, and thanks for the presentation. I actually have 3 questions. Neville, I wasn't
Yeah.
clear, but I did get the timing things once the project is completed or has the completion review. What's the timing on the completion review? In other words, we submit it, you review for completion. How much time do you take to see if it's complete?
Okay, great first question, David. So the legislation allows us up to 15 days for that review for all departments. As you may know, DBI has been doing this initial review between 2 and 5 days. So internally, we're working out how long it will take for everybody to get together. And again, there's a little bit of coordination between us all as we review, and then we create one consolidated email or letter out to you, letting you know overall for all departments what's necessary. So I would say anywhere between 2 and 15 days.
Okay. And then Elizabeth, thanks again. So it sounds like the first application goes to planning first. Okay. And then we cannot even submit for the completeness review on DBI until we have the letter of approval from planning. Is that how that
Correct.
works?
Correct.
Okay.
And so if you think about it the way it is now, you file a building permit with DBI. DBI staff are doing that kind of completeness check right now that Neville just mentioned, right? It's a couple days completeness. You kind of meet basic things.
Right.
Then you come over to planning and our clerical staff do a completeness check all over again. And then you go through all of planning and then we send it back and then it gets in the queue for somebody to be assigned, right? So that's kind of the way it is now.
Yep.
So moving forward, you'll cut out that whole first part. You'll
Okay.
just cut to the chase at planning.
Right.
You'll get through planning. In reality, it's probably going to make your plans pretty darn complete. Once you get through planning, we're looking for a lot of the same stuff that DBI is often looking for in their completeness check, just the standard plan quality kind of stuff.
Okay.
And so I think we're really confident that the delta between like getting out of planning complete and then like what DBI is going to be looking for when you're ready to file construction permits is fairly small and will be much more focused on the sort of specialties of the trade rather than like the quality of the plan submittals. But yes, that's what it is. I think, when we were really looking at this also from a timeline sort of mapping perspective, we really see this wholesale to be a dramatic reduction in overall time for these projects. So even though it is sort of like you have to pass go with planning before you go to DBI, and that could maybe feel like 2 steps where it's 1, we're really seeing this driving down overall timelines by months and months and months of time. And so anyhow, just wanted to
Okay.
share that.
And then once, so we submit to planning for completeness, and there's a 30-day completeness check, and then we're required to do revisions because they're asking for, whatever. What's the timing on then the revisions? Once we submit revisions, is it the same 30-day turnaround in planning?
Yep. And that's what it is right now. And that's actually required, at least for housing, per the Housing Accountability Act, right? We have a requirement on housing projects that we turn around revisions within 30 days. And that's a protocol that we've had in place since January 1. So that will all stay status quo.
Okay.
There won't be any change with kind of that experience of going through the planning completeness check, the planner asking for revisions, you guys uploading revisions, that back and forth should be, and I don't know if you've gone through a project at planning since July 1, but if you have, it should be in alignment with that experience and set of timelines.
Okay, and then the way it used to be, and I don't know if it's still, but we had to arrange and have a neighbors meeting for a project.
So a
Is that-
pre-application meeting,
Is that still required?
it for certain scopes of work, it
Right.
is required. So
Okay.
that is not being proposed to change as part of this at all. So if the scope of work still
Right.
triggers it, then you have to do it. If the
Right.
scope of work doesn't, you won't. I would say the one thing to highlight though, and I'll just preface also, there's so many changes happening right now with between state law and local law as it relates to housing,
Okay.
both what you're allowed to do, but also the processes associated with like how you literally get from A to Z. A lot of housing projects that used to be discretionary and therefore used to require these pre-app meetings are moving into a ministerial space. And as part of being in a ministerial space, most of them will no longer require those pre-app meetings, whereas they used to, because they're in a fully ministerial space. There are a couple little exceptions based on some state laws where I think if you're in basically a priority equity geography and you're leveraging SB 423, you have to do like a kickoff meeting, oddly, at the Planning Commission, but you haven't even filed an application. So there's like a weird little carve out for very particular geographies and using certain state programs. But I would say the number of projects that need pre-app come January 1 are actually going to be significantly fewer than where they are today. But let's say you're just doing a vertical addition on a single family home. You used to always need to do a neighbor pre-app meeting before you file with planning. You'll continue to need to do that.
Okay, and then the last thing is, there was also a requirement, and I don't remember the nomenclature of it, but it was, we would submit kind of minimal plans, and then you would do an evaluation before we even submitted. I forget the name of that process. I want to say a pre-application, but it was like a pre-assessment without even applying yet. Do you know what I'm talking about?
So maybe a project review?
Yeah, and
Does
so,
that sound right?
right, but that
Yeah.
was
Could have been the
kind of,
PPA, Liz.
yeah, we,
Oh, PPA.
a PPA, yeah, that's it. That's it.
PPA.
Yeah.
So we got rid of the PPA July 1. So the
Really?
PPA is no longer a thing in San Francisco.
Okay, cool. All
So
right.
what we would encourage people to do, as sort of getting rid of the PPA process, we still encourage people, especially if you're doing a big complex project, if you've got questions or you're not sure quite how to navigate either, again, this crazy changing landscape of state law and local law, and like what are the intersections, what's the best program to use, what's the most advantageous, how big of a bonus can you use if you're doing residential, all those questions, we would still really encourage you to file a project review, which
Right.
is where you basically just pay for an hour of a staff time to like
Yep.
basically tap Kate's brain for an hour. Is basically what it ends up being.
Okay.
So you always have that option, but it's not mandatory. It's purely optional, whereas the PPA used to be mandatory and we got rid of that mandatory meeting
Okay,
or process.
that's great. That's all I got.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good hearing from you, David.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks for your question, David. Next is Jared. Jared, I just sent you a request to unmute, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question related to ADUs. So for ADU applications, then would the process essentially be, we do the rent board declaration, we wait 15 days, then we file for the planning approval. Once we get the final planning approval, then we file for building permit.
This is going to be probably a really bad answer, but Kate and I and Natalia, who's our lead on our ADU team, were just meeting earlier this afternoon to talk about how we're going to handle ADUs in the context of the shifting process. I'm sorry to say right now, I don't have a perfect answer for you, but I would love to, if I can give you, my contact to have you follow up with me offline, because we are frantically trying to work with our sister agencies to figure out what our solution will be. We're going to try to, again, I don't want to create a third process here for ADUs, which is, I think, kind of what we used to have before COVID. We had a very separate, dedicated special project process for ADUs. So we're trying to figure out what the best way is to weave ADUs into one of those current buckets that we have, like over the counter or this intake process with the planning approval letter, while also knowing that ADUs have their own special set of timelines, both locally and through the state program. And like, how do we weave that not perfect set of alignments together? So we're working through it, but I think probably kind of what you outlined is likely the direction of where we'll go. There's some pre-work that you usually need to do. There are very exhaustive checklists as part of the PRJ and the ADU applications of what you need to do. I think the question will just be whether we have you go through this planning approval process first, or whether we just jump you into the building permit process for concurrent review. So can I ask you to maybe follow up with me via email offline, and we'll try to have that be the fire that lights us getting resolution on this over the next week or two before January 1?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
And if I can, Liz, just have us looped in as well as you formulate your solution. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jared. Next is Stephen. I just sent your request to unmute. Oh, looks like you just lowered your hand. Does anyone have any more questions? Oh, Stephen, you're back.
I'm wondering if you could touch on the SB 1214 change for submitting plans, which now we only need to submit a site plan and a massing plan to get through for the initial progress or submission. I'm basically wondering if how that ties into like the whole package of submitting for both planning and building review.
Yep, absolutely. So happy to handle that. So this is a Senate bill that went into effect, I believe, last cycle, not this latest round, but like one previous to that. How we're handling it is in kind of two primary ways. First, on our project application, our PRJ application that everyone needs to file if you need to deal with the planning department, there is a line in there that basically, it's sort of like an opt-in, opt-out line of whether you want to limit the visibility of basically floor plans, right? That sort of detailed level of plans. If you choose, and there are plenty of applicants who don't seem to care. And so they're like, whatever, let me just do one set of plans and keep it simple. But for those people who do kind of want to avail themselves of that state bill, there's a comment, there's a check you can mark on that. If you do that, the initial application that you will file with us includes the full comprehensive set because we do need those to do our technical review. But what the state law requires that we do is that we don't push that basically proprietary information that you've sort of your work product, your copyrighted product, we can't push that publicly. So those plans will not be, uploaded onto our property information map. Those sets of plans will not be what we send out if there needs to be neighborhood notification. All of those types of plans will basically be classified in our back of house data system. They're classified like internal use only. And when we're ready to get to that stage, like let's just say, for example, this is a project that needs Section 311 neighborhood notification, we will ask you, your project will be flagged to be like, hey, we need the reduced set for neighborhood notification. That's only the massing and, renderings and site plans. So that's how we're handling it. Again, I would say for the initial submittal, you just submit the full set. And then when we're ready to do sort of the publicly disseminable set, you'll have it reduced down. Does that answer the question? Hopefully.
Yes, hopefully. All right, next we've got Steve. Steve, I sent you a request to unmute.
Neville, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, sorry. This is a question for you. Is DPW and BUF part of the concurrent review process, or will they be?
Yes, they are. They're part of the completeness check at the beginning, as well as the final review. And as I stated earlier on, they can screen themselves out of the review process based on that completeness check as well.
Okay, so if a minor encroachment permit is triggered, and we submit plan check comments, they will be part of that overall review on the first time, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, correct. And one of the things we've been looking at internally, just to expand on this a little bit, is just to make sure that as far in advance of the process that this process is going to come. So where sometimes Bureau of Forestry may be able to approve the building permit to be issued as long as you've applied for a tree removal permit or something like that. That way you, the applicant, gets notified as early as possible that that's in the process. It may not necessarily hold up the building permit for that to go to fruition. But these are some of the things that the entire city family is coming together just to look at, current practices and how conducive are they to, to get a project moving and still obtain regulatory compliance.
Great, thank you. I look forward to it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Next, we have M. Hurai.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, thanks. Quick question. Liz mentioned that for planning intake, it would either be emailing to planning department or uploading through Excella, and that's been a little confusing in the past. Is there a reason why it be one or the other, or like I don't know, both?
That's it's a great question. I think we would love to get to a place where we're exclusively in the online portal. But we've gotten a lot of complaints about the usability of the online portal. And so where the complaints are sort of difficult to resolve what the pinch points are. And so instead of sort of forcing people to use a portal that seems to have some usability challenges for some of our customers, we just wanted to be able to offer email. I think long term we'd really love to move off of email again. I think there's some cybersecurity issues that and I think this is one of the reasons DBI is moving into this portal space. So as soon as we have a little bit of breathing time and we can have our technology staff focused on something else, I think we would love to build out something similar. But there's no great reason other than the portal we were getting a lot of
Okay.
it's a little quirky or having challenges or it wasn't easy, and everyone was like, your clerical staff are great and helpful, and email seems easy and usable.
And then OTC will also be digital, so also kind of email too.
No, so OTC is status quo, and OTC has always been paper, in person at the permit center. You come in, you get in the queues on the big TVs, you wait your turn, you get called. So that is status quo, no change.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for your question. Any other questions from anyone else in the webinar?
All right, well, we'd like to thank you all for attending then, and thanks to Liz and Neville for presenting and for everybody else who was available to answer questions. We look forward to seeing you all at our next Public Advisory Forum, the 3rd week of January. Talk to you soon. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.